You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the issues we've talked about so often here on Point of View is Second Amendment rights and the whole issue of gun-free zones, and in particular how this even related to the last election. You can think of the interviews we've done over the years with John Lott and Larry Pratt, and we bring now to the microphone an individual we've also interviewed with some regularity, Erich Pratt, who is the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. It is an organization that is grassroots, actually represents more than 1.5 million Americans. Also, I might just mention they've been involved in the years with some of the legal assistance to people who've been in lawsuits with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. He's the author of a number of books I might mention too: Bearing Arms, Our Rights, Our Duties, and Our Freedoms, Our Rights, Our Duties, and Our Freedoms, as well as one on civil government called The Constitutional Recipe for Freedom. Erich, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, it's great to be back with you. Thanks so much for having me today.
We have a number of articles we've posted from Gun Owners of America, which is, again, gunowners.org, but also posted an article that was in Breitbart from a number of months ago in which you're interviewed and others at Gun Owners. Gun Owners of America say disarming good guys does not disarm bad guys. That is one of those statements, I think, that's sort of like saying water is wet. But nevertheless, I've watched you and your father and other spokespeople over the years on various news programs, and they don't seem to understand that taking guns away from the good guys is not going to disarm the bad guys. What are your thoughts?
Well, exactly, Kirby. Some people don't get the fact that bad guys are bad guys, and that means they don't obey the laws. So if you pass a law saying, well, we're going to make this area a gun-free zone, whether it's a school or a military base or a bar or whatever, that doesn't mean that bad guys are going to obey it. In fact, those end up being the magnets that attract the criminally minded. And so it shouldn't be surprising that over 90% of the public mass shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. But I'll tell you, Kirby, what a difference when good guys have guns. There was one earlier this year where a teenager killed his father, very tragic, and then he took a firearm from the home and he went to a local school and he started shooting people there. Well, a firefighter heard the report. He's a concealed carrier. He grabbed his firearm, went to the school, confronted the teenager, and stopped the shooting, saved many lives. Now, in many places, what that firefighter did could have been breaking state or federal law by having that firearm. But here, clearly, you have a good guy who was using a gun in a good way to stop a potential mass shooting from taking place. It's no surprise that police, over 80% of police, think that teachers and principals and others like that should be able to carry guns at schools to protect students from harm from terrorists who obviously don't care what the law says.
We're in just a few minutes going to talk about some of the actions that President, of course right now President-elect, but eventually future President Donald Trump can take to save the Second Amendment. But before we do so, I know you've been involved in speaking during this fall in the campaign, and I would have to say that there was a stark difference between the two presidential candidates when it comes to the Second Amendment, correct?
Oh, absolutely. There was a huge difference. The Second Amendment was a big deal in the recent election. Hillary Clinton supported overturning the Supreme Court Heller decision from 2008. That was a decision that protected the individual right to keep and bear arms. The other view says that there's only a collective right for the military or the police or maybe a National Guard or something like that, but not for individuals. And so, of course, that was law in places like Chicago and Washington, D.C., and places like that, which incidentally also had very high murder rates. Hillary also favored implementing Australian-style round-em-up gun confiscation. She said that is something that the United States should consider. Trump, on the other hand, a radically different approach, said we have too much gun control. He said he wants to repeal restrictive laws and appoint pro-constitutional judges, which would also infer judges that support the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. So this was a big issue. I think for many, many voters, especially in some of the key swing states. And now that Trump is the president-elect, he's already said that he wants to repeal gun-free zones, which we were just talking about, and that he wants to sign concealed carry reciprocity legislation, which is very significant. Reciprocity legislation would basically say that if you can carry concealed in your home state, then you can carry concealed around the country. It would be like, you're licensed to drive in one state, but then you couldn't drive into another state because maybe their laws were slightly different or they didn't recognize your laws, or you're married in one state and then another state doesn't recognize it. Well, that's the issue that we have with concealed carry right now, and sometimes there's huge problems. Shanine Allen is a nurse who lives in Philadelphia, a very sweet woman. I have met her. She's a single mother of two. Well, she was subjected to 2 robberies. And so she decided, you know what, I'm going to get a firearm, learn to protect myself, and get a concealed carry permit. And she did that in the state of Pennsylvania. Well, sadly, one day she's in New Jersey, and she's pulled over by a police officer, and she just announces, thinking she's doing a helpful thing, hey, I'm a licensed concealed carry permit holder from Pennsylvania. Well, they threw her in jail. She was in jail for 40 days. She hadn't done anything unlawful in the sense of using force illegitimately. She didn't hold up a convenience store. It was simply a matter of possessing a firearm, which she was legal to do in one state, but it became illegal in another state. And that's the kind of travesty that people have to put up with when it comes to carrying a firearm, and that's the type of thing that we're trying to change, and Trump has signaled he wants to change.
As a matter of fact, those of you taking notes, you might put down 1 through 5, and we've already given you one of those, of course, nominating a pro-Second Amendment justice, but the other one is this idea of reciprocity, and I thought it was interesting in this article that many people have seen. It's where Donald Trump said something that maybe you didn't hear because, I don't know, maybe the corporate press doesn't cover it. He says the right of self-defense doesn't stop at the end of your driveway. That's why I have a concealed carry permit and why tens of millions of Americans do too. That permit should be valid in all 50 states. And this is the same thing I've dealt with, Eric. As I actually even have something locked up in my car, I have to think about as I'm driving, which states am I driving through, and is there ever going to be a problem with that? Since obviously if I'm ever pulled over, and I haven't been, but if I were, I'm going to show them both my license and my concealed carry permit, and that of course starts out a whole series of questions. And it is amazing to me because, I was married in Oregon. I live in Texas now, but I don't have to get remarried in Texas. And these are all sorts of other laws that we have reciprocity for, but the Second Amendment just doesn't seem to apply when we come to those kinds of legal situations, does it?
Yeah, Kirby, I would point out it's very helpful to be able to travel state to state with your firearm because, let's face it, you in many ways face a greater chance of being victimized outside of your home. You may remember the story from last year. A former CNN reporter, Lynn Russell, was traveling with her husband across the southwestern states. They were staying at a Motel 6, and she had gone out to the car to get something, and as she was coming back into the room, an intruder shoved his way in as well and was holding her up. Well, her husband, about that time, comes out of the shower, saw what was happening, grabbed their gun, and after a firefight, the bad guy was shot dead. Now, I say he was shot dead, but he made his way out to the parking lot. He was found there. He died later at the hospital. But this was a classic case of guns saving lives. I mean, so simple to understand, even a former CNN reporter could grasp it, right? but the reason she's alive is because of concealed carry reciprocity, where you have that freedom and the boldness and confidence to be able to drive out of your state or maybe fly out of your state and still be able to protect yourself in one of the other states in our union.
Privileged to have with us for a little bit longer Erich Pratt. He is the Executive Director for Gun Owners of America. And again, you can go to that website, which I would highly recommend. It's just called gunowners.org. You might want to be an individual that signs up, become one of those 1.5 million Americans dedicated to promoting Second Amendment freedom. And we've talked a little bit about a few of these issues, Erich. And again, we'll get some phone calls in just a minute. One, of course, as many people would understand, nominating a pro-Second Amendment justice to the Supreme Court. That one's pretty straightforward. You've just helped us understand this issue of national reciprocity. Very important. But let's take a couple more. One of those has to do with the idea of a suppressor. You know, every once in a while I'll buy a gun, especially there's a rifle that's come out and that says it's really equipped to be used with a suppressor. And then I roll my eyes because I realize, okay, that's going to take months and months and months, paperwork and $200 federal stamp tax. And then maybe I'll be able to be allowed to use it. Last time I read the Second Amendment, didn't it say something about shall not be infringed? What part am I missing here?
Exactly, shall not be infringed. And this is a huge infringement. Who knows what was the reasoning for putting the restrictions on suppressors that are there in the federal code, but obviously a tremendous restriction. I know people who do a lot more shooting than I do, and it's kind of a sad thing because some of them now are wearing hearing aids, and they're relatively young, but it's because of the thousands upon thousands of rounds that they've shot. Even using hearing protection, it still takes its toll on your ears. And, the irony, Kirby, is that when you look across the ocean to England, which, of course, is very restrictive when it comes to firearms. I mean, they make it really hard to be able to get a gun. In most cases, you can't even have a gun for self-defense. Yet, if you are allowed to have a firearm, you are highly encouraged to get a suppressor. Yeah, in England, they just consider it being polite because, after all, it reduces noise pollution, quote unquote. So, the why we haven't loosened the restrictions up till now is beyond me. As you mentioned, it's going to take months and months to get one. You'll have to get background checked, fingerprinted, pay a tax, all that. There is legislation in the Congress that would dispense with all that. I'm pretty sure Donald Trump would sign that. That's something that Gun Owners of America is going to be fighting to change this coming year.
Again, some people listening to that one might say, well, I don't use a suppressor, I don't care. Well, how about if you're older? This is the Social Security gun ban, and this is kind of insidious, so it's going to take a minute to explain. But for our older listeners, this is a real concern for them, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. By way of comparison, over 250,000 military veterans have been prevented by law from owning a firearm because of medical issues such as PTSD, et cetera. They're given somebody to handle their finances, a guardian to handle their finances, and then their names are put into the background check system, and they're considered mental defectives. That's exactly what the Obama administration, through federal regulation, started doing to seniors, so that if same type of scenario, if you have a guardian handling your affairs, or you've been affected by a stroke or something like that, that you now become part of the prohibited class where you cannot legally own a gun. Of course, that throws open the question, well, what happens then to the inheritance that would be passed on to children? There have actually been cases where the feds have shown, there was one notable case in Idaho where they were going to, I think his name was John Allen, I forget his last name, but they were going to take his firearms. Thankfully, he got wind of it ahead of time. The sheriff showed up along with some local legislators, state legislators, and, the Fed said, forget it. And they left, and he was able to keep his firearms. Maybe it was John Gibson. Anyway, so there have been cases like this already. The Los Angeles Times says that potentially there's 4.2 million seniors that could be affected by these regulations. So this is something that we are at Gun Owners of America pressing President-elect Trump to repeal these regulations, along with many others that Obama had written.
Which gets to the fifth one, and that is, again, one of those sort of obvious ones, along with nominating a pro-Second Amendment justice, and that is, it does seem to me that much of what we have seen under the current administration, under President Obama, are executive orders. So it does seem to me that President-elect Donald Trump, and when he becomes president, could fairly quickly remove some of those executive orders. And what are those, and what could he do?
Yeah, and this is, as difficult as it was to deal with the president's phone in his pen as he was circumventing Congress and just writing these executive orders into quote-unquote law. The benefit is that when it hasn't been passed by Congress, it's easy on the books and easy off the books. And so things like the Social Security or the seniors gun ban that we just talked about, there's also a ban on gunsmiths that the Obama administration is pushing in, restrictions on private sales where if you sell 2 or more guns privately, you could be in danger of 5 years in jail or a $250,000 fine. And one other thing that could be reversed is opening the office at the FBI to process appeals. As it stands now, 95% of initial denials under the background check system are false positives. They're people that should not have been denied. They're accidents or people with the same name as a bad guy. And the Obama administration took all the appeals agents and just transferred them to other duties. So now if you are denied illegitimately and you try to appeal it, there's nobody, the lights are not on there at the FBI to process that appeal. That's one office that certainly the Trump administration could restaff.
Well, again, those are some things we've talked about with John Lott, and again, that just is one more action that can be taken through executive order because, again, the president is the head of the executive branch. Just before I let you go, let's talk about what is available at your website. We have a link to it so people can click on the picture of Erich Pratt and then go to gunowners.org, or you can just go there directly. You have action items. You have an opportunity for people to join and actually have a membership. There are all sorts of resources, media, and the rest. So take us through what you can find on your website and how various individuals that go to your website can actually use them.
Absolutely. Well, I think the strength of Gun Owners of America is in our grassroots. We've had very many notable victories, including killing and defeating legislation this past year to implement gun bans using a secret watch list. In fact, it frustrated Harry Reid so much. He said Republicans are cowering to Gun Owners of America. GOA, he said, is worse than bad. Of course, what he was really reacting to was our members, our activists. We generate just hundreds of thousands of phone calls and emails and postcards into the Congress. And so when people go to our site at gunowners.org, on the right-hand side, there's a black box. Yes, people can join. You can also sign up for our email alerts. The email alerts are free. And I encourage people, if you really care about the Second Amendment issue, look, a lot of people have said, hey, we won the election. Well, we haven't won anything yet. We need to now go proactively and start repealing these things, and that's going to take a lot of work, and we're going to need to put a lot of heat on these guys. So I encourage people to sign up for the email alerts, become a member, too, for $20 a year, and people can also go and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
I might just mention, too, under your resource section, you have a number of fact sheets, and one that I've pointed people to over the years by Larry Pratt. What does the Bible say about gun control? Because we have, Eric, a number of listeners that might say, I really never really thought about this issue of guns and deterrence and defense and protecting my family and how to really think about all those verses. And this is a very helpful piece that if somebody is really wanted to think about that from a biblical point of view, goes into some detail. So again, as you go to gunowners.org, click on that button that says resources and look for that one that says, what does the Bible say about gun control? I think you'll find it very interesting and again, helpful as you begin to think through how to apply your biblical point of view on this particular issue. So, Erich, we always appreciate the good work that Gun Owners has done over the years. I've been broadcasting through either as a guest host or a co-host or now as a host for 30 years, and we've called upon you and we'll continue to do so. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you so much, Kirby. A pleasure as always, and Merry Christmas to you and all the staff there at Point of View.